The world is a fearsome and fearful place at times. Dominating our thoughts this week has been the increasing conflict in Ukraine. There's a situation now where the long shadow of war is beginning to fall. But closer to home, there are also plenty of other things that cause us to worry. There is the cost of living crisis, there is the challenging weather systems, all those other problems and inconveniences that we have to go through in our daily lives. If all we had was the surface level view of life, there's not much hope to be found in these days we're living in, is there? We feel small in the face of these big events, and whatever our views, we can't do much to alter the course of events, especially in places far away. But even in our own small contexts, the situations we face, sometimes we feel powerless there too. It's all a bit grim. But our reading today is a timely reminder that there is always more going on just below the surface of life. In this story of the Transfiguration of Jesus, we discover in the midst of all the chaos of fear and of suffering, there is a glory to be found. In the darkest times, a shining light of hope sparkles around us. So Jesus has taken Peter and James and John up to a mountain to pray. They have stepped out of the ordinary pace of life to a moment of quiet, of solitude. And Jesus was praying. And as that was happening, something remarkable happened. His face changed, Luke says, and his clothes began to shine brightly. And then two figures appeared next to him, Moses and Elijah, and they were talking about things yet to come, the events that will soon take place in Jerusalem. Peter and the others were very sleepy, but as they wake up and come to themselves, they realize what is happening. And Peter, being a man of action, offers to build some shelter so that they could stay for a little bit longer. But this was not meant to be forever. And so a cloud comes and covers them, and a voice speaks, "This is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." And then it's all over. They're alone with Jesus again. It's a fascinating story, and Luke tells us at the end that they didn't share much of this story at the time. They didn't tell the others. And it's no wonder. Would you have told anyone about this story? You could call this event a record of a mystical or religious experience. For a moment, these three disciples are given a glimpse below the surface. They see something that not many people see. In a religious experience, we encounter God in an unexpected way, and that can take all kinds of forms. And I wonder if you've had an experience like that. I'm not suggesting you've seen Jesus shining with light, with Moses and Elijah next to him, because that kind of moment is unique. But maybe you know what it is to see the world differently, even just for a moment. For me, it's happened once when I was taking some time away to be quiet, to get some rest and to think. And I was walking in the woods somewhere, and my mind was busy. I was pondering what might be next for me. I wasn't really paying attention to the world around me, but then suddenly a wind picked up, strong wind, and I stood still. And as I felt that powerful wind flowing, surrounding me, as I looked at the trees and the sky and all the things around me, suddenly time stopped. My mind was suddenly clear, and there's a sense of peace about the future. Now, some people might write off a moment like that as just some wind blowing through the trees. But for me, in that moment, at that time, it was an encounter with God. It was a reminder that despite my concerns, despite the busyness of my mind, in that moment, God was with me. And he always will be. Maybe for you it's a different moment. You were doing the dishes, you were walking to the shops, you were sitting in prayer or something else. What moments of encounter have you had with God that interrupted the normal flow of life, even just for a second or two? And I wonder, like the disciples, you might not have shared that with anyone before, but maybe the experience changed you. It's interesting to read what Jesus and Moses and Elijah were talking about. The content was the future and what was going to happen at Jerusalem. And you have to ask, of all the things that could have been discussed that day, why is the focus on suffering and what seems to be defeat? Why were they talking about Jesus and Jerusalem in that way? Because that's what is meant by Jerusalem at this point in the gospel. That shadow of Jerusalem has fallen. The cross is beginning to make an entrance into the story, something the disciples couldn't have expected, but Jesus knew was coming. And he knew he was going to face sorrow and grief, and something of that future was now being spoken of up on that mountain. His disciples don't grasp what it all means, but looking back on it, they can understand what it was all about. So I think there's something really helpful for us in this part of the story. This moment of transfiguration revealed to the disciples that Jesus is much more than they imagined him to be. They thought they knew him. They had really only scratched the surface. But in that moment, a curtain is pulled back and the full weight of his glory falls on them. But why all that talk about suffering and Jerusalem? Well, I think for these disciples, they needed that experience on the mountain to carry them through what was about to take place. They needed to know who Jesus was if they're going to survive the trauma and the terror of what is to come. Because when they all go down the mountain again, back to ordinary life, the old problems will be waiting for them, and the new problems to come round the corner. This momentary revealing of who Jesus is was given to them as a way of finding hope in troubling times. When they see Jesus taken from them, when he is nailed to the cross, the glory they saw on that mountain shines through the horror of what they were experiencing. On the worst days of their lives, this vision of Jesus transfigured would offer them comfort, some hope that this is not the end of the story. And so too for us. Because we're living in our own dark times, the future is far from certain in our part of the world. And so many of us in our personal lives are facing an unknown future. We're wrestling with decisions, we're worried about family, we're anxious about our health, and so on and so on. We live in dark times, and in our dark times, we need to hold on to that transfiguration of Jesus. We need to remember that below the surface of this world, there is glory that radiates through it all. In our suffering, in our struggles, in our fear, we need to remember who Jesus is. The radiance of God, the one who shines light into the darkness and tells us not to be afraid. We must bring us to those moments that we've had with God, and we must remember the way he has shown himself to us. When life becomes challenging, what things are you going to draw on? What experience of God's faithfulness and provision are going to help you through the dark times? What signs of his presence will you give to others as a reason for courage and a reason to keep going? Because this for me is what Transfiguration Sunday is about. A reminder that we walk with Jesus in this world, that he walks with us, and even when the world seems to be falling apart, he holds us and he'll never let us go. Because he is the radiance of God's glory. He is the King of creation. He is the risen Christ who is bringing all the broken pieces of the world back together again. He is the source of life, the beginning and the end, and he is with us, for us. And so as you venture into an unknown week, as you go back down the mountain into the ordinariness of life with all the problems that come, may you take that vision of Jesus with you. May it give you hope in times when you are tempted to despair. And may it give you peace when you're feeling afraid. And may it give you courage to keep on travelling with him. Amen.